We were sitting at our kitchen table in our house in Naperville, Illinois, the one we'd bought 3 years into our marriage, when everything still felt like it was heading somewhere good. The kids were in bed, the dishes were done, and my wife, Brooke, had just finished telling me she'd signed up for a weekend leadership retreat in Scottsdale without mentioning it to me first. "I just think," she said, folding her hands around her coffee mug the way she always did when she'd already decided something and was just going through the motions of the conversation, "that I need to start putting myself first more. And honestly, Carter, marriage doesn't mean you're at the center of my world. I have other priorities now." I sat there for a moment. Just sat there. 23 seconds. I counted later, because that's what your brain does when it's trying to make sense of something that doesn't quite fit the shape of the life you thought you were living. "Okay," I said finally. "That's your choice." She blinked. I think she expected me to argue, maybe even beg. After 8 years of marriage, she probably had a pretty good read on which version of me would show up in a moment like that. The version that apologized. The version that asked what he could do differently. The version that cleared his schedule and tried harder. But something shifted inside me in those 23 seconds. Something quiet and fundamental. I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated. I was just done performing. So I nodded. Went back to my coffee. And over the next 4 weeks, I started treating my time the exact same way she'd told me she treated hers. What happened next wasn't what either of us expected. And by the time she sat across from me in that same kitchen, tears on her cheeks, saying, "Carter, it feels like you've completely disappeared," I realized that nothing I ever could have said in those 23 seconds would have taught her what my silence and my absence eventually did. This is the story of how I stopped fighting for a position in someone's life that they'd already told me I didn't hold, and what happened when I finally believed them. Before I get into this, if this kind of story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in a relationship you gave everything to, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment below. Tell me if you've ever been in a moment where someone told you exactly who they were and you just weren't ready to hear it yet. And hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and I genuinely believe some of them need to hear this one. My name is Carter Ellison. I'm 41 years old, and I work as a structural engineer for a firm based out of downtown Chicago. I take the 742 Metro from Naperville every weekday morning, the same train I've taken for 11 years, and I spend the 45-minute ride reviewing drawings or just watching the flat Illinois landscape blur past the window. I'm not a dramatic person by nature. I don't make scenes. I don't send long texts at midnight. When there's a problem, I prefer to look at it the way I look at a structural problem. Identify the load-bearing issue, address it directly, don't make the fix more complicated than the problem requires. Brooke would tell you the same thing about me. She'd probably also tell you it drove her crazy, that I was too even-keeled, that she could never read what I was really feeling, that I was emotionally unavailable in ways she'd started cataloging in a journal around year 5 of our marriage. I knew about the journal. She wasn't hiding it. We met in Milwaukee in 2009 at a mutual friend's birthday dinner at a loud Italian place on Brady Street. Brooke was 26, working as a marketing coordinator for a healthcare company, and she had this energy I'd never encountered in another person. She talked with her whole body. She had opinions about everything. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, which should have been annoying but somehow wasn't. I was 28, quiet, recently promoted, still figuring out who I was outside of work. She was everything I wasn't, and I think that was the point. I thought her energy would fill in the gaps in me. I think she thought my steadiness would give her something to push off of. That math works fine for a while, then it stops working entirely. We got married in 2013 in a small ceremony in Dormeux County, Wisconsin. 40 people, a rented farmhouse, Brooke's grandmother's ring. We had our daughter Nora in 2015 and our son Preston in 2018. Those years between them were the best years of our marriage. We were too busy and too tired to have the space for the problems that were always sitting there, waiting. When you have a newborn and a toddler and 2 careers and a house that always needs something, you don't examine the foundation. You just keep moving. When Preston started sleeping through the night and Nora started first grade and Brooke went back to full-time work, the space opened up, and the problems moved back in like they owned the place. By 2021, I would describe our marriage the way I might describe a building that looked fine from the street. The facade intact, the paint fresh. But if you looked at the foundation, really got down and looked, you'd see the settlement cracks. The the places where the structure had shifted and not quite shifted back. Brooke started a new job in late 2020, a director of marketing role at a tech company in Chicago's West Loop. Significant promotion, more money, more travel, more visibility. I was proud of her, genuinely. She'd worked toward that for a long time. But something changed in her with that job. Not immediately. Gradually, the way things change when you spend 40 hours a week in an environment that constantly tells you you're exceptional. She joined a women's leadership network, started going to monthly dinners in the city, at the kind of restaurants I read about in magazine lists but didn't frequent. Made new friends, women who were ambitious and opinionated and had very developed ideas about what a woman should and shouldn't compromise on in her personal life. I want to be careful here, because none of that is wrong. Ambition isn't wrong. Evolving isn't wrong. The desire to be seen as more than just someone's wife and someone's mother isn't wrong. But there is a difference between growing and slowly detaching from a life you've built with another person while telling yourself it's the same thing. One is addition. The other is subtraction dressed in the language of the first. She stopped asking about my projects. For years she'd been curious. I work on interesting things sometimes. Bridge retrofits, historic renovations in Evanston, a pedestrian overpass in the Loop. She used to ask, follow up, remember details. Then she stopped. When I asked about her day, I got detailed, animated 20-minute answers. When she asked about mine, she'd nod while looking at her phone. I want to tell you about one specific night, 3 months before the kitchen table conversation. We had reservations at a restaurant in the city I'd booked for our anniversary, a small French bistro on Randolph Street we'd talked about trying for 2 years. I'd made the reservation 6 weeks in advance and had looked at it in my calendar more than once, looking forward to it the way you look forward to evidence that good, normal things are still possible. At 4 in the afternoon on the day of the reservation, Brooke texted me. Hey, Alicia's in town unexpectedly. Can we rain check tonight? I know it's our anniversary, but she's only here for one night. Alicia was a friend from the leadership network. I'd met her twice, briefly. I held my phone on the Metro platform at Ogilvy and read that text 3 times. Then I wrote back. Sure. That was it. Sure. I canceled the reservation, picked up Nora and Preston, fed them dinner, helped with homework, did bath time, did bedtime, turned off the light in 2 small rooms, and stood in the hallway of my house in the quiet after. Brooke got home around 11, animated in that particular way you get when you've spent an evening with someone who reflects back everything you like about yourself. Good night? I asked. So good, she said, kicking off her heels. Alicia just gets it. She really sees me. Good, I said, and that was that. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, today was our anniversary. I booked that restaurant 6 weeks ago. You canceled it at 4 in the afternoon for someone you met 14 months ago. I didn't say it because I'd spent 8 years training myself out of conflict. Training myself to be the steady one. The even-keeled one. The man who didn't make things harder than they already were. And you know what steady gets you eventually? Invisible. 3 months later was the kitchen table conversation. She'd told me about the Scottsdale retreat. I'd asked mildly whether she'd considered that it fell on the same weekend as Preston's spring soccer tournament, the one she'd already told him she'd be at. He was 5 years old. He'd told his teammates his mom was coming. She said Preston would understand. Then came the words. I just think I need to start putting myself first more. And honestly, Carter, marriage doesn't mean you're at the center of my world. I have other priorities now. She said it calmly, confidently, like she'd been waiting for the right moment to deliver it, like it was a boundary she was finally brave enough to set. I sat for 23 seconds. She wasn't wrong, technically. Marriage doesn't require that any one person be another person's entire world. People are allowed to grow in directions that weren't anticipated at the altar. But there's a difference between, I also have a life, and you are not my priority. One is balance. The other is a ranking. And she'd just told me mine. So when I said, that's your choice, I meant it completely. What I didn't say out loud was, and this is mine. What I did next was simple. I started treating my time the way she'd told me she treated hers. Week 1. My friend Damon called. We'd been close since the University of Illinois in Champaign, lived 20 minutes apart now in the western suburbs, used to grab dinner or catch a game before life got in the way of those things. He had 2 Cubs tickets for Friday night, opening homestand, lower deck. I said yes. I didn't ask Brooke if it was okay. I didn't check whether it made her schedule complicated. I just said yes. When I told her, she looked up from her laptop. This Friday? Yeah. I was thinking we could do something with the kids on Friday. You could still do that, I said. I'll be back by 10. She didn't say anything. I think she was waiting for me to backtrack. I didn't. The game was at Wrigley. Damon and I took the red line from Howard, the way we'd done in our 20s. We ate terrible hot dogs, drank cold beer, talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with work or children or the negotiations of domestic life. I got home at 10:15. Brooke was already in bed. It was the best Friday night I'd had in 2 years. Week 2. I signed up for a morning running group. It met Tuesday and Thursday at 5:45 at a park in Wheaton, a loose collection of people in their 30s and 40s moving through the dark at a pace that required effort but allowed conversation. I'd been a runner in my 20s and had mostly quit in my mid-30s. I started again. I also started going to the gym on Saturday mornings. An hour, maybe 90 minutes. I stopped being available for the Saturday routine of coordinating everyone's schedules and anticipating Brooke's preferences for how the day should unfold. She asked on the second Saturday where I was going. Gym, I said. For how long? Couple hours? Nothing else. But I noticed something on her face I hadn't seen in a while. Not anger, closer to disorientation. Like someone had slightly rearranged the furniture in a room she thought she knew. Week 3. My colleague Adrian had been asking me to his poker night for months. He ran a monthly game at his house in Oak Park. 5-card stud, 7 guys, 6 years running. I'd always said, maybe next time. The third week, I went. I also started working later on Tuesdays. Not for any dramatic reason. Just because there were things I genuinely wanted to focus on without the commute cutting the time short. I texted Brooke to let her know. She texted back, okay. When I got home at 8:30, the kids were in bed. Brooke was on the couch watching something. A show we'd been watching together, had watched the first 4 episodes of Together, had explicitly agreed to wait on. She'd watched 2 more without me. I made a sandwich in the kitchen and didn't say anything about it, but I noted it. Week 4. My brother Tyler lives in Denver. He'd been asking me to visit since the previous fall, just a long weekend. He wanted to take me hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park, something we'd talked about doing since we were teenagers and had never actually done. I booked the flight, told Brooke on a Sunday morning, the way she'd told me about Scottsdale, casually, already decided. I'm going to Denver in a few weeks. Long weekend with Tyler, the 14th. She set down her fork. The 14th? That's the weekend of the Harmon's party. We already said we'd go. You should still go, I said. I'm sure everyone would love to see you. The look on her face was something I hadn't seen in a while. Not anger, not controlled frustration. Something closer to genuine disorientation. Like she was looking at a map of a place she thought she knew and finding that the roads had quietly moved. It happened on a Thursday night in the 5th week. I was cleaning up after dinner when Brooke came in and sat down at the table, not casually, deliberately. Both feet on the floor, phone face down, hands folded. The posture she used when she wanted to have a conversation. I dried my hands and turned around. Her eyes were wet, that pre-crying glassiness where the emotion is at the surface but hasn't broken through yet. Carter, can we talk? Sure, I said, and sat down across from her. She was quiet for a moment. Brooke was rarely quiet before saying something she'd decided to say. I feel like you've disappeared, she said finally. I held that sentence and turned it over carefully. Disappeared, I repeated. You're just not here anymore. You're always out, or working late, or planning things without me. I feel like I don't even know where you are half the time. She paused. I feel like I've lost you. What I said was quieter and simpler than anything I'd rehearsed. Brooke, about 5 weeks ago, you told me that marriage doesn't put me at the center of your world, that you have other priorities. I took you at your word. I started treating my time the same way you told me you treat yours. She stared at me. I wasn't punishing you, I said. I wasn't playing a game. I just decided to believe what you told me. The silence between us was different from any we'd had in years. It had weight, honesty, the kind of silence that only exists when neither person is performing. I didn't mean it like that, she said. Her voice was uncertain in a way I hadn't heard before, like she was saying it and simultaneously asking herself if it was true. What did you mean? I asked. She didn't answer right away. And in that not answering, I think something started to click. Because here's the thing about what happens when you tell someone they're not your priority. If they collapse, if they beg and rearrange and try harder, you don't learn anything from that. You learn your words have power. You learn you can define the terms and the other person will absorb them. But when you tell someone they're not your priority, and they simply nod and go live their life, and then 4 weeks later you're sitting at a kitchen table feeling the specific loneliness of a house that contains a person who has accidentally become self-sufficient, that teaches you something different. It teaches you what you were actually asking for, and whether you actually wanted what you said you wanted. I think, Brooke said slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee mug, I got so focused on what I needed that I stopped thinking about what us needed. I didn't respond. I let it sit. I wanted you to fight for me, she said. I wanted you to push back. I wanted to hear you say I mattered enough to argue about. You do matter, I said. But I can't matter less than everything else in your life, and then be the one who fights to stay at the table. That's not a marriage. That's an arrangement where one person keeps adjusting, and the other person keeps setting the terms. Another silence, the longer kind. When did I become someone you had to fight against? She asked, and her voice broke slightly on the last word. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in probably 2 years. I want to tell you that moment was satisfying. It wasn't. It wasn't triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt sad. Sad that it had taken 4 weeks of quiet absence to communicate what 8 years of steady presence hadn't managed to say. Sad that the only language she'd heard was the one I borrowed from her. But underneath the sadness, there was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. We talked for 2.5 hours that night. The longest real conversation we'd had in years. Not logistics or calendar coordination, but the kind where you say the things you've been not saying because you'd convinced yourself that not saying them was keeping the peace. I told her about the anniversary dinner, about standing on the platform at Ogilvy reading her text, about typing sure and pressing send and riding the metro home in the dark and doing bath time and reading to Preston and turning off his lamp and then standing in the hallway of our house in the quiet after both kids were asleep and feeling something I didn't have a word for yet. She cried. Real crying, not the pre-crying glassiness from before. I didn't think you cared, she said. I thought if you cared, you'd have said something. I'd been saying things for 3 years, I said. In general terms. But you're right about the dinner. I didn't say anything specific. I just absorbed it. Why? Because I'd gotten so practiced at absorbing that specific complaint started to feel like weakness. Like I was supposed to be the steady one. And steady people don't bring up the anniversary dinner. She was quiet. I think, Brooke said eventually, I convinced myself that independence meant distance. That needing you was something I was supposed to have evolved past. And all those women in my network saying, put yourself first, protect your energy, I applied it too broadly. I applied it to everything. Including us. Including you. She looked at me. I think I was trying to be empowered, and I accidentally became someone I wouldn't want to be married to. That sentence came out so quietly I almost missed it. Like she'd found the exact true thing and wasn't entirely sure she should say it out loud. I don't want to be that person, she said. Okay, I said. Is it too late? And here's where I have to be honest, because I don't want to give you a story that's tidier than the truth. I didn't know. In that moment, I genuinely did not know. 8 years. 2 kids asleep upstairs. A house in a suburb of Chicago where I'd sat for 23 seconds and decided something had to change. I didn't know if what we'd accumulated, the distance, the adjustment, the revision, the quiet erasure, was something we could walk back. Some things you put down and can pick back up. Some things change shape while they're on the floor. I don't know, I told her, but I'm willing to find out. We started seeing a couples therapist, Dr. Renee Wallace, out of a no-frills office in Downers Grove. 2 chairs, a couch, windows looking out onto a parking lot. The kind of place that doesn't try to impress you. She was maybe 50, with the specific quality of attention that takes years to develop. The kind that makes you feel like your words are actually being heard rather than just processed. In our first session, she asked us each to describe the marriage in 1 sentence. Brooke said, "We have a good life together, but I think we stopped seeing each other somewhere along the way." I said, "I spent years being steady for someone who eventually mistook steadiness for absence." Dr. Wallace looked at us both for a moment. "You're describing the same problem from different sides of it," she said. That's a reasonable place to start. Therapy is slow, not revelatory the way people expect. More like weekly inventory. You go in, you take stock, you notice things you hadn't named before. You come back the following week and notice more things. Incremental, unglamorous, occasionally frustrating, ultimately essential. What I noticed over the first few months, Brooke hadn't stopped caring about me. She had stopped seeing me. Those are different things. When you stop caring, the relationship is already over. When you stop seeing someone, there's still something there. You've just developed a selective blindness that serves the story you're currently telling about your life. What Brooke noticed, she said in session 4, was that she'd been confusing self-advocacy with entitlement. Somewhere between the books and the retreats and the network dinners, she'd built a philosophy of herself that had no accounting in it for what she was costing the people around her. I kept hearing, "Put yourself first," she said, and I thought that meant everything else was optional. I used it as permission to stop being accountable. Dr. Wallace said something I've thought about many times since. Putting yourself first is healthy when it means honoring your authentic needs. It becomes something else when it means treating other people's needs as irrelevant, especially people who have organized their lives around you. There's a version of self-advocacy that is really just a sophisticated vocabulary for taking without giving. Brooke sat with that for a long time, long enough that I thought she might argue with it. "I was taking," she said finally, flat, certain, without defensiveness. "Yes," Dr. Wallace said, not unkindly, just accurately. "I want to tell you about a Saturday in July that I think of as the actual turning point. Not because anything dramatic happened, because of how ordinary it was. My brother Tyler was visiting from Denver with his girlfriend. We'd planned a cookout at our house. Brooke had gotten up early and made potato salad from scratch. She'd also, without any reminder, remembered that Tyler was allergic to mustard and had made him a separate small batch with a different base. When Tyler mentioned it, surprised she'd remembered, Brooke said simply, "Carter told me years ago. I just kept it." Tyler looked at me over his plate with an expression I recognized from growing up with him, the one that meant he was filing something away. Later, cleaning up, Tyler said quietly, "She seems different." "She is," I said. "Good different?" "Yeah, I think so." Tyler had been one of the 2 people I'd called during the worst week, the week after the kitchen table, before anything had been resolved. He'd listened without judgment and said one thing that stayed with me through everything that followed. "You can't love someone into choosing to show up," he'd said. "They have to decide to. All you can do is make clear what the cost of not choosing is." She was choosing now. Not perfectly, and not every day. There were still moments when I'd noticed the old patterns starting to reassert. The reflexive centering of her own experience. The tendency to revise shared history to match the current mood. But she'd notice it too now. She'd catch herself and name it, and we'd talk about it instead of letting it settle into the foundation where it could do slow damage. I've been thinking about how to say what I actually learned without it sounding like a set of rules. I'm a structural engineer. I'm constitutionally suspicious of tidy formulas. But there are a few things I keep coming back to that feel true enough to say out loud. Steadiness is not the same as presence. I had confused the two for 8 years. I showed up, I provided, I adjusted, I absorbed, I stayed. I thought that was presence. It isn't. Presence requires visibility. And in the process of trying to be the most convenient possible version of a husband, the one who didn't make things harder, I'd made myself invisible. Not to my kids, not to my colleagues or my brother, only to the one person whose sight of me mattered most. Your adjustment communicates more than your arguments. I could have argued with Brooke that night, made a case for my own importance, listed what I'd given and what I'd set aside. People do that. It almost never works, because the person receiving that speech has a rebuttal prepared and isn't in a position to really hear anything while they're defending their right to feel how they feel. What worked, what finally got through, was behavior. When I started treating my time like it had value, she started to sense that maybe it did. When I stopped rearranging myself to fit her schedule, she noticed the shape of my absence, and the shape of my absence told her something my arguments never would have. Believing someone when they tell you who they are is not giving up. This took me longest to understand. When Brooke told me I wasn't her priority, the most honest response was exactly what I did. Believe her, and act on that information. Not as punishment, not as strategy, but because she'd given me accurate information about the current terms of our relationship, and pretending otherwise would have been a disservice to both of us. You cannot occupy a position you were not invited to hold. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do for a marriage is stop performing your part in it. I'd been performing for years. The steady, uncomplaining, accommodating husband who made everything easy. Not a lie, exactly. I do have those qualities. But a performance in that, I'd amplified them into a persona that required the other person to either appreciate it or take it for granted. Brooke had chosen the second option, not because she was a bad person, but because what we show people, consistently, is what they eventually stop seeing. When I stopped performing, when I became a person with a life and preferences and somewhere to be, she finally had to see me as a person rather than a role. And seeing me as a person, apparently, made her remember that she missed me. We're doing better now. I want to say that clearly, because I know some of you are in situations that are not going to get better, and I don't want to hand you a version of this that pretends to be universal. Some marriages can be repaired. Some can't. The difference usually has less to do with the severity of the damage than with whether both people are genuinely willing to be honest about what caused it. We go to therapy twice a month now instead of every week. Nora is 8. Preston is 5 and is, I'm increasingly convinced, going to become a structural engineer, judging by the amount of time he spends testing the load-bearing capacity of household furniture. Both of them have no idea how close their family came to something that could not have been walked back. I still take the 742 Metro from Naperville every weekday morning. I still watch the flat Illinois landscape blur past the window. But I go to Damon's poker nights. I run Tuesday and Thursday mornings in the dark. I call Tyler on Sunday afternoons. And Brooke knows about all of it, and she asks about it the way she used to ask about my projects, with genuine curiosity, like the answer actually matters to her. Last month she booked a restaurant in the city for our anniversary, 6 weeks in advance. Told me 3 weeks ahead of time. I wanted to make sure you'd keep the date open, she said. I looked at her for a moment. I'll keep the date open, I said. It was a small thing. The kind of thing that would mean nothing to someone who hadn't stood on a metro platform reading a text that told them their anniversary didn't rank against an unexpected visit from someone their wife had met 14 months ago. But it meant something to me. Some repairs aren't dramatic. They don't come with a single conversation or a grand gesture or a moment you can point to and say that's when everything changed. They come as a slow accumulation of small choices. One person deciding to show up. Another person deciding to be worth showing up for. We're still accumulating. Carter didn't argue. He didn't scream. He just sat in silence for 23 seconds and made a choice. When Brooke told him he wasn't her priority, he did the hardest thing a loving partner could do. He believed her. He stopped performing the role of the overly accommodating husband and let her feel the cold, heavy shape of his absence. And that's the brutal truth. Your silence will often teach people what your words never could. When you constantly adjust and absorb neglect to keep the peace, you become invisible. But when you finally stand your ground and walk away, they suddenly remember how much they needed your presence. Carter was a structural engineer. He knew that a foundation doesn't collapse from a storm. It breaks when one side carries the entire load for too long. The lesson? Never let your steadiness become your erasure. If someone tells you you're not their priority, stop fighting for a seat at their table.